Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The rain fell in heavy, unrelenting sheets, turning the cobblestone streets of the capital city into a slick, treacherous maze. Selena kept to the shadows, moving with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to being unseen. Her breath came in sharp, controlled bursts as she darted through narrow alleys, her dark cloak soaked through and clinging to her skin. She could hear them, her former brothers and sisters of the dark cult, closing in behind her, their footsteps splashing through the water. As they hunted her, they would never stop, not until she was dead. A sharp pain flared in her side where a blade had grazed her, a gift from one of the assassins she had barely escaped. She pressed her hand against the wound, wincing as the warmth of her own blood seeped through her fingers. She couldn't afford to slow down, not now, not when she was so close to reaching the safe house. The city was alive, even at this late hour, though the people milling about the taverns and markets were blissfully unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. They didn't know about the dark cult, the hidden threat festering beneath the surface of their world. And they certainly didn't know about Selena, the woman who had once served that very cult, now fleeing for her life. She had been one of them once, a blade in the night, a bringer of death. But something had changed. She had changed, and now she was here, risking everything to warn the kingdom of the coming storm. Selena's heart pounded as she spotted the nondescript door at the end of the alley, her sanctuary. She shoved it open and slipped inside, bolting it shut behind her. The room was dimly lit by a single lantern, casting long shadows across the rough wooden wall. A figure stood in the center of the room, cloaked in shadow, waiting for her. "Lord Andress," Selena said, her voice hoarse from the effort of running. The figure stepped forward, revealing the sharp, angular features of Lord Andress, the head of the kingdom's spy network. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over her, as if he could see right through her. "You were late," Andress said, his voice like ice. "I was delayed," Selena replied, her hand still pressed against her wound. "I brought the information, just as I promised." Amitras didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gestured to one of his men who stepped forward and searched Selena for a weapon. She didn't resist. She had expected this. The kingdom did trust her. How could they? She had spent years working for the enemy, for the very cult that now sought to bring their world to its knees. Once satisfied that she was unarmed, Andress nodded. "Speak. Tell me what you know." Selena took a deep breath, steadying herself. "The dark cult is planning a coup. They intend to assassinate the kingdom's leaders during the Council of Lords next week. They'll strike when all the lords are gathered in one place. It will be chaos, and in the aftermath, they'll move to take control." Andress's expression didn't change. "And why should I believe you?" "Because I was there when they made the plan," Selena said, her voice tinged with frustration. "I was one of them. I know how they operate. If you don't act now, it will be too late." Andress studied her in silence, his gaze hard and unyielding. Then he turned to one of his spies, a man named Jarek, who had been standing silently by the wall. "What do you think, Jarek?" Jarek stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he regarded Selena. "I think she's lying," he said bluntly. "She's trying to lead us into a trap. She wants us to lower our defenses so the cult can strike." Selena felt a surge of anger. She had expected distrust, but the intensity of Jarek's suspicion still stung. "I am not lying," she snapped. "I came here to help you." "And why should we believe a word you say?" Jarek shot back, his voice sharp. "You were one of them. How do we know you haven't turned against them just to save your own skin?" "I left the cult because I couldn't stand by and watch them tear this kingdom apart," Selena replied, her voice steady. "I've risked everything to bring you this information, believe me or don't. But if you ignore what I've told you, the blood of your leaders will be on your hand." Andress raised a hand, silencing Jarek before he could respond. "Enough," he said quietly. "Whether or not we trust her is irrelevant. The information is too important to ignore." Jarek scowled, but said nothing more. Andress turned back to Selena. "You'll work with Jarek to gather more evidence of this plot. We need confirmation before we can act." Selena nodded, though the thought of working with someone who so clearly despised her didn't sit well. She had no choice. If she wanted to stop the dark cult, she would have to play by Andress' rule. "Understood," she said, "but we need to move quickly. The cult is indeed waiting." They left the safe house under cover of darkness, moving through the city like shadows. Jarek led the way, his posture stiff and wary, while Selena followed close behind, her eyes scanning every alley and rooftop for signs of the cult's assassin. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the streets were still slick, the air thick with the scent of wet stone and decay. "We'll start at the temple," Jarek said quietly as they approached the outskirts of the city. "It's still where the cult holds their rituals. If there's any evidence of their plan, we'll find it there." Selena nodded, but said nothing. She had been to the temple many times during her years with the cult. It was a place steeped in darkness where blood had been spilled in the name of power and control. The thought of returning there sent a shiver down her spine, but she forced herself to focus. There was no room for fear now. They moved quickly through the forest that bordered the city, the trees looming tall and foreboding in the pale moonlight. The temple was hidden deep within the woods, concealed by a labyrinth of overgrown paths and ancient ruin. It had once been a place of worship, a sanctuary for those seeking the god, but the cult had corrupted it, turning it into a place of death and despair. As they neared the temple, Jarek slowed, motioning for Selena to follow his lead. They crept closer, staying low to the ground, their movements silent and precise. The temple was just as she remembered it, cold, dark, and foreboding. Shadows danced across the crumbling stone walls, and the faint sound of chanting echoed from within. Selena's heart raced as they slipped through the broken entrance, the stench of blood and incense filling her nostril. The main chamber was dimly lit by torches, casting eerie flickers of light on the dark stone altar at the center of the room. Hooded figures stood around the altar, their voices low and rhythmic as they recited incantations in a language older than time itself. Jarek gestured for Selena to stay back as he moved closer, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of the cult's leader. Selena remained in the shadows, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger she no longer carried. The weight of her betrayal hung heavy in the air, the memories of her time with the cult pressing down on her like a suffocating fog. Suddenly, a figure stepped forward from the shadows, her face hidden beneath a hood. Selena's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the woman, the one person she had hoped never to see again. "Allure," Selena whispered, her voice barely audible. Allure, Selena's former mentor and one of the cult's highest-ranking leaders, lowered her hood, revealing her sharp, angular features. Her eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Selena's, as if she had known all along that she would come. "Selena," Allure said, her voice a silken whisper, "I knew you would return." Selena's blood ran cold as Allure's words echoed in her ears. This wasn't a coincidence. Allure had been expecting her. "Did you think you could run from your past forever?" Allure asked, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Did you really believe you could betray us and live to tell the tale?" "I left because I couldn't be a part of your madness anymore," Selena replied, her voice shaking. "The kingdom doesn't deserve what you're replanning." Allure's smile widened. "Oh, Selena, you never understood, did you? The kingdom is weak, rotting from the inside. The dark cult will bring order where there's only chaos. You were one of us once. You could still be again." Selena's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of Allure's words pressing down on her like a fight. For a moment, she was back there, in the darkness, a part of the cult's twisted world. But she shook her head, forcing herself to remember why she had left, why she had risked it to stop that. "No," Selena said, her voice stronger now. "I want you to go back." Allure's eyes narrowed. "Then you will die." Before Selena could react, Allure raised her hand and a burst of dark energy shot toward her. Selena ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast as it slammed into the wall behind her, shattering the stone. She rolled to her feet, her eyes scanning the room for a weapon. She spotted a dagger lying on a nearby table and lunged for it, just as Allure unleashed another attack. Selena barely managed to grab the dagger before Allure was on her, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. The force of Allure's strikes drove Selena back, her muscles straining as she fought to hold her ground. Allure was stronger, more skilled, and fueled by the dark magic that pulsed through her veins. But Selena had something Allure didn't, reason to fight. She ducked under one of Allure's swings and drove her dagger into her mentor's side, the blade sinking deep into flesh. Allure let out a gasp of pain, her eyes widening in shock. But before Selena could pull the dagger free, Allure struck her with a blast of dark energy, sending her flying across the room. Selena hit the ground hard, her vision swimming as pain radiated through her body. She struggled to get to her feet, but Allure was already closing in, her eyes burning with fury. "You were always weak," Allure hissed, raising her hand for the final blow. "That's why you never belong." Selena and time tightened around the hilt of the dagger, her mind racing. She couldn't let it end like this. She'd come too far, sacrificed too much. With a surge of adrenaline, she rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding Allure's sad attack. The blast of dark energy struck the altar, shattering it into pieces. Era whirled around, her face twisted in rage, but before she could strike again, Jarek appeared behind her, his sword flashing in the dim light. Allure turned just in time to block his strike, but the force of the blow knocked her off balance. Selena seized the opportunity, lunging forward with her dagger and driving it into Allure's heart. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Allure's eyes widened in shock, her lips parting as if to speak. But no words came. She staggered back, her body trembling as the life drained from her. And then with one final, shuddering breath, she collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Selena stood over her mentor, spotty, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. The weight of what she had done pressed down on her, a mixture of relief and sorrow flooding through her. Allure had been more than just a mentor. She had been a part of Selena's life, her past, and now she was gone. Jarek sheathed his sword, his expression unreadable as he looked down at Allure's body. "Send over," he said quietly. Selena nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. The immediate threat was gone, but the cult was still out there, still plotting, still waiting, and her fight was far from over. Selena stood in the aftermath of the battle, the cold air of the temple pressing in around her. Allure's body lay motionless at her feet, and for the first time, in what felt like years, a silence settled over her mind. The relentless pursuit, the fear, the guilt, they were still there, but dulled now, softened by the grim satisfaction of survival. Jarek remained still beside her, watching the fallen leader of the dark cult with a mixture of awareness and something else, perhaps a flicker of respect for an enemy vanquished. But there was no time to rest. The cult was vast, and though Allure had been a formidable leader, she was not the only one with power. Selena knew that even now, their true master was out there, watching, waiting for an opening. Killing Allure was a victory, but it was far from the final one. She turned to Jarek, wiping the blood from her blade, her muscles still tense from the fight. "We need to move," she said, her voice low but firm. "This is just one step. The cult will retaliate." Jarek nodded. His face, typically hard and distrustful, seemed slightly softened in the dim light of the temple. "You've bought us time," he admitted. "But you're right. We can stay here." The temple had always been a place of darkness, a symbol of the cult, selfish into the heart of the kingdom. And now it was desecrated with the blood of one of their own. The cult said that members would soon come looking for answers. They needed to be long gone by then. Selena led the way out of the temple, her steps quick but quiet, her senses heightened as they re-entered the labyrinthine forest that surrounded the ancient ruin. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air damp and heavy. As they weaved through the trees, the silence between them felt almost suffocating. Selena knew Jarek still didn't trust her completely, despite everything they had been through. His loyalty was to the kingdom, to Andress, and she was still an outsider, a defector. But that didn't truly matter now. What mattered was stopping the cult fight plan. They had to get back to Lord Andrews, warn him about the new threat. They had uncovered the traitor in the kingdom as inner circle, the one who'd been feeding information to the cult. With Allure dead, the traitor would likely grow desperate, accelerating their plan. "We should avoid the main roads," Jarek said after a long silence. "They'll be patrolling them by now." Selena nodded in agreement. "We cut through the Old Mill Road. It's slower, but they want to expect us to go that way." They moved in silence for what felt like hours, the city lights in the distance slowly growing closer. Selena's mind raced as they walked, replaying the events of the night, the feeling of Allure's blade against hers, the final, desperate plunge of her dagger. She had killed before, countless times, but this was different. This had been personal. Allure had been her mentor, a figure who had shaped her into what she was, a weapon. And now she was dead by Selena's own hand. There was no going back from that. The outskirts of the city finally came into view as the night deepened. The streets were quieter, now most of the citizens locked away in their homes, oblivious to the war being fought in the shadows. Selena felt a pang of envy. How simple their lives must be, how ignorant of the darkness that threatened to swallow them all. As they approached the safe house, Selena caught sight of movement in the alleyway just ahead. She froze, her hand instinctively moving to the hilt of her dagger, and silently drew his sword, his eyes narrowing. A figure stepped out from the shadows, one of Anarchist's men, recognizable by the insignia on his cloak. He approached cautiously, his eyes darting between Selena and Jarek. "Lord Andres sent me," the man said, his voice hushed. "He's waiting for you." Selena relaxed slightly, but kept her guard up. Jarek, however, seemed more at ease, sheathing his sword and nodding to the man. "Lead the way," Jarek said. They followed the man through a series of winding streets, eventually arriving at a small, unassuming building nestled between two larger warehouses. The safe house, Selena's eyes, heart quickened as they approached the door. This was it, the moment where everything hinged on trust, whether Andres would believe them, whether they could stop the cult before it was too late. Inside, the room was dimly lit, much like before, with Lord Andres standing at the center. His face was as unreadable as ever, his sharp eyes taking in every detail as they entered. Selena could feel the weight of his scrutiny, and she knew that Jarek's word alone wouldn't be enough to sway him. "What news?" Andres asked, his voice cold and direct. Selena stepped forward. "Elira is dead." There was a flicker of surprise in Andres' eyes, but it quickly faded. "And the cult?" "Still a threat," Selena replied. "But there's more. One of your own, a traitor. They've been feeding information to the cult, working with them to destabilize the kingdom." Andreselgo's gaze hardened, though he showed no other outward sign of shock. "A traitor," he repeated, his voice thoughtful. "Did you uncover who?" Selena shook her head. "Not yet, but Elira knew. She hinted that everything was going according to plan, that your defenses have already been compromised." Andres paced for a moment, his brow furrowed. "If what you say is true, then we may be facing a crisis even larger than we thought. The traitor could be anyone. We'll need to tread carefully." Jurek stepped forward. "We need to act quickly. The cult will retaliate for Galeria's death, and if the traitor senses we re onto them, they will accelerate whatever plans they have." Andras nodded. "Agreed. We will increase security around the council, but we need to flush out the traitor before they can do any more damage." He turned his gaze back to Selena. "You've proven yourself useful so far, but this next step will require complete trust. Do you think you're capable of that?" The question lingered in the air, and Selena felt the weight of it pressing down on her. Trust, it was such a fragile thing, especially for someone like her, someone who had spent years living in the shadows, playing both sides. But if there was ever a time to commit to one side, it was now. "I'll do what needs to be done," Selena said firmly. Andres seemed satisfied with her answer. "Good. Then you will stay with us until we root out this traitor. You know the cult better than anyone. We'll need your insight if we're going to succeed." Selena nodded, though. The prospect of staying within the kingdom's inner circle made her uneasy. She had always been an outsider, operating on the fringes of society, never truly belonging to any one place or cause. But now it seemed she was being pulled into the very heart of the kingdom's power, and that came with its own set of dangers. "Jarek, I want you to keep an eye on her," Andres continued. "Make sure she's not tempted to slip back into old habits." Jarek's eyes flicked to Selena, but he said nothing. His expression was unreadable, though she could sense the tension between them. He still didn't trust her. Maybe he never would. And Andres gave them both a curt nod before turning back to the maps and documents spread across the table. "We have work to do." The next few days passed in a blur of covert meetings, surveillance missions, and whispered conversations in dark alleys. Selena and Jarek worked side by side, their uneasy partnership growing more functional as time went on, though the underlying tension never quite disappeared. They were both professionals bound by a common goal, but trust was still a distant dream. It was during one of these surveillance missions, late at night in a remote part of the city, that they finally got a lead. Selena had noticed a man slipping out of one of the counselor's estates, a man she recognized from her time with the cult. He'd been one of Elira's personal guards, a trusted enforcer. "That's him," Selena whispered to Jarek as they crouched in the shadows. "He was with Elira. We need to follow him." They trailed the man through the winding streets of the capital, careful to keep their distance. He moved quickly, clearly trying to avoid detection, but Selena's years of experience in the cult had taught her how to move unseen. She and Jarek kept to the shadows, following the man as he made his way to a secluded tavern on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the tavern was dimly lit, the smell of stale ale and smoke thick in the air. Selena and Jarek took seats near the back, watching as the man met with another figure, a woman cloaked and hooded. They spoke in hushed tones, but from the intensity of their conversation, it was clear something important was being discussed. "That's Ija," Jarek whispered. "One of the council's aides. She sound the traitor." Selena saw it. Heart raced as the pieces finally fell into place. The woman had access to sensitive information enough to sabotage the kingdom's defenses from within, and now she was conspiring with one of the cult's top enforcers. "We need to move now," Jarek said, his hand already on his sword. Selena grabbed his arm, stopping him. We need to be smart about that. If we move too soon, she'll escape. We need to catch them both in the act." They waited, biding their time as the two conspirators continued their meeting. Eventually, the man handed the woman a sealed letter, and Selena knew it was now or never. She and Jarek moved in unison, drawing their weapons as they approached the table. The man saw them first, his eyes widening in shock. "It's a trap," he shouted, lunging for the door. But Jarek was faster, cutting him off with a swift strike of his blade. The man collapsed, blood pooling on the floor beneath him. The woman tried to run, but Selena was already there, her dagger pressed against the woman's throat before she could take another step. "It's 10 over," Selena said coldly. "You've been caught." The woman's eyes were wild with fear, her chest heaving as she tried to break free, but Selena held her firm. She knew better than to show mercy to someone who betrayed everything they claimed to protect. Jarek quickly secured the woman, binding her hands and gagging her before she could call for help. With the traitor in their custody, they could finally deliver her to Ansaris and put an end to the cult's influence within the kingdom. As they made their way back to the safe house, Selena couldn't tell but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had won this round. And for the first time in a long while, Selena felt like she had a purpose. She was no longer running from her past. She was fighting for something bigger than herself. The darkness still loomed, but for now there was light at the end of the tunnel.